Do you miss the classic movies from the 80s and 90s? Are you curious about what all the hype was about? Or do you just love discovering great movies that you never knew existed? Well, then you're in the right place. I'm Jay, and this is Back to the Flicks, a film nostalgia channel that's dedicated to the 80s and 90s movies where classics were born. And today we're headed deep into the swamps for one of the strangest comic book adaptations of the 80s, 1982 Swamp Thing, directed by horror legend Wes Craven. Now, before I even start my review, there's some cool horror history attached deep within this movie. Our lead actress, Adrienne Barbeau, here as Alice Campbell, at one point in time was married to another iconic horror director, John Carpenter. And in this movie, as well as Arcane's secretary, we've got Mimi Craven, who would later become Wes Craven's wife. So the behind the scenes of this is connected to two iconic legends in the horror genre. And this movie itself is big brother to one of the most iconic horror films in cinematic history, A Nightmare on Elm Street. It was shortly after the filming of Swamp Thing where Wes Craven came up with the idea for Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger. And the Swamp Thing movie itself is not one of the polished modern superhero cinematic movies. This is pulp, basic practical effects. This is mad science, swamp fog, mercenaries, weird monster logic, and early 80s comic book energy before the genre got cleaned up and corporate. So grab your popcorn, your snacks, and your drinks, and let's get back to the flicks.
Let's take a trip down memory lane. So hop in the whip, let's ride the wave. Destination set where classics were born. So kick up your feet and grab the popcorn. Blockbuster movies that swept the nation. Hit the like, subscribe, and notification.
The movie opens by dropping Alice Cable straight into the middle of nowhere, arriving by helicopter over a swamp that already feels isolated, secretive, and dangerous. Before she even gets settled, she's told that the man she's replacing didn't make it out of here alive. A warning that immediately tells us that this assignment is bigger than a routine government transfer. At the same time, the film cuts away to a small armed group moving through the swamp in camouflage, quietly setting up the threat that's been hanging over the research project from the very beginning. Not far from them, one of the facility's fieldmen comes across the militia in the swamp. Before he can get a word back, he's surrounded, and the group's leader, marked by a red bandana, pulls out a snake and uses the venom to kill him in one of the movie's strangest early moments. Alice finally reaches the remote facility, where she's quickly brought into the operation and introduced to Dr. Alec Holland and Dr. Linda Holland, the scientists behind the project. It's also here that the name Arcane enters the conversation, a dangerous figure already tied to the fear that somebody wants this research, all for the wrong reasons. As Alice starts getting her bearings, she and Alec go out to inspect one of the swamp sensors feeding data back to the lab. What they find makes it clear that this isn't just equipment failure. Someone has been inside the unit, and it looks like deliberate sabotage. And suddenly the tension around the project starts feeling a lot more immediate. Then the team hears sounds like gunfire and scrambles, assuming that the threat has finally hit the facility. But when they rush inside, they realize that the loud blast didn't come from an attack at all. It came from Holland's latest experiment, a glowing green formula that reacts violently when it hits the floor. The moment changes the whole feel of the research. What first looked like advanced plant science suddenly seems like it might be something far more volatile. And before this opening stretches over, the movie has already planted the core idea that this experiment isn't just important, it's dangerous, unstable, and valuable enough for someone to kill for it. Right away, Swamp Thing does something I actually like. It throws Alice in the swamp unprepared and overdressed. She's been assigned to one of the worst government experiments in America. She's coming in blind, and the movie takes no time in letting you know how dangerous this place is. And these 80s comic book villains are way over the top. Instead of just taking this facility member out with a gunshot, the goon pulls a snake from his pocket and lets the venom take this guy out. That's old school movie logic. Ridiculous and over the top, but it's memorable, and it lets us know exactly what kind of movie we're in. And the movie is also doing a great job at setting up a lot of suspicion around this lab. A dead predecessor, sabotage, and a missing man. And the name Arcane already floating around before any chaos even begins. And even for a real campy movie, the setup is pretty solid. And what starts as a setup to increase food production for a growing population, turning into something that could potentially be weaponized, the whole tone within the lab shifts. This is exactly the type of discovery that could change things for the population of the world for good or bad. Back inside the facility, Alec finally explains what he and Linda have been working towards. His research is built around combining plant and animal structures into a single living system, not to create a weapon, but to create stronger, more adaptable plant life that could survive in harsher conditions and help address future food shortages. The idea is ambitious, and for a moment the movie slows down just enough to show that Alec's work is meant to help people. To demonstrate the breakthrough, the team adds a drop of compound into the water with a local plant material. Around the same time, Alice learns that Linda isn't actually Alex's sister and research partner, not his wife. night, which slightly changes the dynamic of the lab and makes their work feel more like a tight family operation built around trust and shared purpose. Then Alex makes the connection. The drop that splashed early onto the wood planks have already triggered a rapid new growth, with living cedar shoots pushing straight out of the wood itself. That's the moment that the experiment stopped feeling theoretical, and what looked like instability earlier on now looks revolutionary. Alice heads out to report the breakthrough to Ritter, but while she moves through the camp, the militia group from earlier is already taking control of the facility. When she enters and sees what's happening, it's too late. The red bandanaed goon from earlier, whose name is Ferret, starts the attack. He captures her and uses her to gain access to the secured lab. Alec and Linda are held at gunpoint as the experiment continues reacting in the background, the growth now spreading across the table and making it painfully obvious that the Hollands were on the edge of something major. Then the real betrayal lands. The man they've known as Ritter steps forward and reveals that he's actually Arcane. He wants every note, every formula, and every piece of research connected to this project. Linda tries to save the work and make a run for it, but Arcane shoots her in the back, killing her. Alec breaks loose in rage, grabs the formula and tries to escape, but he's struck down before he can get away. The chemicals spill over him and the lab erupts, and Alec runs out engulfed in flames before diving into the swamp. Under the water, the fire, smoke, and chemical reaction continue exploding around him as Arcane's men move off with the research they came to steal. The excitement of finding out that this research is doing exactly what they wanted it to do is followed directly by tragedy. The facility has been compromised by Arcane. To find out that their boss, Ritter, has been gone for a long time and that not only is he dead, but the person they thought he was their worst enemy. Linda being killed in an escape attempt, and Dr. Holland crashing out and losing himself to the very formula that he and Linda created. It seems that all is lost at this point, and with the formula transferring hands to a villain like Arcane, it's highly unlikely that this formula will be used to save anyone. Before Arcane gets his hands on the formula, it's proven that it actually works, and aggressively. This formula can not only rapidly increase a plant's growth rate, but it can also regenerate dormant plant cells. And all this tragedy leads us to the real birth of the Swamp Thing. This is not some triumphant hero origin story, but a scientific breakthrough that gets hijacked and turned into a nightmare. And this portion of the movie matters a lot because it's not creating a monster. This is destroying a world that Alec Holland had way before the monster even existed. By morning, the destruction is complete. Arcane's men spend the dawn covering their tracks, dumping bodies and wiping away all the evidence of what happened at the facility, while Alice manages to stay alive just long enough to hide Alec's last notebook. Not too soon after she does so, Ferret captures her in the swamp and tries to drown her, but just when it looks like she's out of options, something rises from the water and attacks. A green human-like creature pulls her to safety and turns the tables on Arcane's men, forcing them back long enough for Alice to get away without fully understanding what saved her. We then cut over to Arcane's mansion, where he and his secretary start going through everything taken from the lab. And that's when Arcane realizes that the material is incomplete. Alex's most recent notebook is missing, which means someone got away with one thing he still needs. During her escape, Alice eventually reaches a nearby gas station and calls for help. Thinking she's reaching the surviving members of her own side, instead the call is routed straight back to Arcane, and her unaware of Ritter's demise, he still poses as the facility's manager. He tells her that he was away from the site when the attack happened. In the middle of trying to secure help, Alice reveals the exact thing Arcane was hoping to confirm. She's alive and she has the last notebook. The lab is gone, Linda is dead, and Alec is missing, presumed dead. And now the plot narrows down to two things: Alice surviving and Arcane finding that notebook. And this is the engine of the middle of the movie. And Swamp Thing's first appearance isn't framed as this big heroic entrance. There's more mystery to it than that. And that actually works better for the character at this point, because Alice doesn't know what he is yet, and neither do the bad guys. And showing us Arcane in his mansion helps to develop the movie in a different way. It shows us that this villain is in a totally different lane from this swamp environment. The swamp is organic and unpredictable, and Arcane's place is controlled and polished. So even before he gets his hands on this formula, the movie already puts him into position as someone who wants to control nature and not understand it. The contrast is simple, but it helps. And just like any good old school thriller, the gas station scene shows us that Cable thinks she's getting control of the situation, where she's literally handing over her safety to her direct opposition. She survives the initial confrontation, but she directly makes everything worse by letting him know she has that notebook. At the gas station, Alice meets Jude, the young attendant working out in the middle of nowhere. And for a brief second, the movie gives her something she has not had since the lab attack. A place to stop and catch her breath. But that pause doesn't last long. Arcane's men arrive almost immediately, forcing Alice and Jude to duck for cover before the chase starts all over again. Alice takes off back towards the swamp, and once again, the creature appears when she's cornered. This time, it steps directly into the path of the pursuing vehicle and shuts the whole chase down by force, taking gunfire without slowing and throwing Arcane's men aside like they're nothing. This movie still keeps the creature half mysterious, but what matters is that it is no longer just lurking in the background. It's actively actively protecting her. Even after being saved again, Alice still doesn't trust what she's looking at. She tells the creature to leave her alone, and it actually listens, turning and disappearing back into the swamp. That's an important beat because it shows there's intelligence and restraint in this thing before Alice fully understands who or what it is. Once the immediate danger passes, Jude finds Alice and leads her towards a nearby cabin so she can change clothes and regroup. Meanwhile, Arcane gets the report from the men and shifts his strategy. Instead of simply hunting the creature blind, he decides to use Alice as bait, realizing that wherever she goes, the swamp creature is never too far behind. This is the part of the movie where Swamp Thing makes his presence and his motives known. Once he steps in front of that vehicle and stops it dead in his tracks and starts to take all that gunfire, it lets the goons know that this creature is actually stepping in to protect Alice. And even though she can tell what this thing is doing, she still acts like a normal person. She's not treating this thing like some noble protector. She's scared, confused, and literally trying to get away from everything that's trying to harm her in this swamp. And that's kind of a good thing because her adjusting to this too soon would not really make it feel natural. And little kid Jude is not some random character. He's like a spirit guide at this point, helping facilitate Alice through the transitions of her escape. And Arcane is like the perfect old school villain. He wants to control everything, even the creature that's showing up and getting his way and stopping him from getting the things that he wants. So now Alice is in possession of two highly coveted things from Dr. Arcane, the Book of Notes and the swamp creature. The next stretch takes Alice and Jude back towards the ruined research site, when the movie finally starts peeling back the mystery around the creature in the swamp. When they reach the wreckage, Alice spots the creature moving through the burned out remains of the lab, and in one of the key visual moments of the film, it's holding Linda's locket as if it's trying to reconnect. The implication becomes clear. This is Alec Holland, changed into something else but still carrying pieces of who he was. The creature moves through the rubble like it's searching for whatever can still be recovered from the experiment, but Alice isn't ready for the realization yet. She finds Alex's hidden notebook and pulls back, still seeing the figure as something dangerous rather than someone familiar. At the same time, the movie quietly reminds us how far the formula has already gone. The growth from earlier has continued spreading, turning the ruins of the lab into proof that Alex's work really was alive and changing everything around it. As Alice and Jude leave the site by boat, Arcane's men close in from the swamp. That pulls the creature back into action, and this becomes one of the movie's bigger combat set pieces. The swamp thing rises out of the reeds, tearing through the militia despite bullets and grenades coming at him from multiple directions. He crashes the boats and disrupts the whole assault, but even that isn't enough to fully save them. Realizing that this notebook is one thing Arcane still needs, Alice tells Jude that he needs to escape, but before they can fully leave, the attack breaks them apart. Alice hears Jude cry out, and she's captured again and taken away by Arcane's men. This part of the movie lets all the on-screen characters know something that us as watchers have already realized. This creature is in fact Dr. Alec Holland, and yes, it's retained some sense of who he was before he got turned. And him holding that locket in the lab and still trying to reinvestigate his research gives this monster real pathos instead of just making him a swamp guardian in a rubber suit. And the movie still isn't rushing Alice into understanding this creature. Her instincts still make her pull away, and from her perspective, she's been hunted through the swamp, attacked, nearly drowned, and saved twice by something that she still really doesn't understand. So the movie is allowing her to develop this trust slowly instead of just forcing it. And the swamp thing taking out all the militia group lets us know exactly how powerful this creature is. He's highly intelligent and a direct physical threat to all Arcane's plans. But Arcane's men still keep applying pressure. No matter how many wins it seems like the swamp thing gets, Arcane is playing chess, and he makes the next move immediately. After the swamp battle, the creature finds Jude motionless in the boat and places a glowing hand against his head, bringing him back to life. That moment gives Jude the answer that Alice still doesn't have yet. The creature is not just some monster in the swamp, but something tied directly to her and Alec Holland's work. Jude hands over the missing notebook for safekeeping, making Swamp Thing the one character now protecting the last piece of the formula Arcane still needs. At the same time, Alice is being held aboard Arcane's boat. She manages to break free, diving into the water, swimming for shore before the men can stop her, with Ferret in close pursuit. Once she reaches the land, she runs straight into the creature again. But this time, the encounter turns into a direct confrontation with Ferret. As Alice watches, Ferret hacks off one of Swamp Thing's arms, but even badly damaged, the creature overpowers him and kills him, ending the pursuit for good. The shock of it all causes Alice to faint, and when she wakes up, she's in Swamp Thing's arms. He presents her with an orchid and speaks to her, and in that moment, she finally understands the truth. The being in front of her is Alec Holland, transformed but still alive. The realization doesn't last long before Arcane's men close in again. Following Alice, they find Swamp Thing, trap him in a net, and recover the final notebook, finally delivering both the creature and the missing research to Arcane's hands. And now the Swamp Thing isn't just some protective rampaging creature. Reviving Jude puts him more in the supernatural realm now, but it also shows that he's compassionate because he doesn't know who Jude is. And the face-off between him and Ferret gives us real stakes. Even though something as powerful as the Swamp Thing can crush a man's head with one hand, he's still vulnerable to physical attacks, shown exactly by him losing one of his limbs. And it's not just like cutting off a tree branch, this actually hurt him. And the Swamp Thing presenting Alice with that orchid lets her know exactly who he is. Now she can finally take all the fragments of her experiences and put them together. And as she realizes Dr. Holland, and her perspective changes immediately. She realizes that the man she was growing a bond with is now trapped into this grotesque creature. And just when that connection is established, Arcane steps in again and dominates the sequence, capturing Alice, the Swamp Thing, and the Notebook in one foul swoop. Arcane now holds all the pieces. Back at Arcane's estate, he's hosting a formal dinner now to celebrate his victory. His wealthy backers and supporters are present. He's now got this stolen revolutionary breakthrough formula and is treating the night as an unveiling of this new age power. At the center of it all is Bruno, who Arcane publicly places on display as proof that the experiment is ready for its next stage. Then Arcane reveals the truth in the most cold-blooded way possible. Bruno has already been dosed. In front of the guests, Bruno begins convulsing and mutating into a grotesque shrunken creature, sending the entire room into panic as Arcane watches the transformation unfold. What was framed as a triumph instantly turns into a horror show. Below the estate, Swamp Thing remains in prison, and Arcane presses him for answers. That's when Alec explains the real nature of the formula. It does not simply create power, it magnifies the truth of whatever is already inside the subject. Bruno's outward size and intimidation meant nothing, because inwardly he was weak and fearful, and the formula brought that weakness to the surface. Arcane still believes that the formula will reward him differently, convinced that his own genius will be elevated rather than exposed. He locks Alice in the dungeon and goes back upstairs to take the formula for himself. At the same time, a shaft of sunlight reaches into the Swamp Thing's cell and regenerates his severed arm, restoring his strength and giving him the chance to break free. Swamp Thing frees Alice and the mutated Bruno, and they escape the dungeon through the underwater passage leading back towards the swamp. Above them, Arcane's body begins its own monstrous transformation, setting up the final confrontation. This is one of the better late movie turns, because Arcane stops pretending he's a scientist that's serving humanity and fully becomes a man drunk off of his own self-image. This dinner display isn't about discovery, it's about ego. He wanted all the donors and elites in attendance, revealing something that might make him untouchable. And Bruno's mutation is important because it gives the movie its thesis on this monster transformation. This formula isn't some clear upgrade serum, it's basically a revealer. It drags out and puts on full display the core of what makes that person who they are. On the inside, Bruno was a coward, he was a little man. So once he was dosed, that manifested physically. In Dr. Holland's case, he's a savior, which is why even though he's physically distorted into this Swamp Thing, he still has the physical and healing capability to actually save people. So now with Dr. Arcane taking it and the madman that he is, we can only assume what he's about to turn into. Once Arcane drinks the formula for himself, the transformation finally exposes exactly what Swamp Thing warned him about. Instead of becoming some perfect super being, Arcane mutates into a massive, hairy, boar-like monster and tears through his own upper chambers in a frenzy before arming himself with a sword and heading down to finish what he started. By the time he reaches the dungeon, Alice and the transformed Bruno have already escaped through the underwater tunnel, leading back out towards the swamp. Arcane follows them into the marsh when the final confrontation turns into a muddy, chaotic fight between the two creatures. During the confrontation, Arcane manages to stab Alice with a sword, dropping her with what looks like a fatal wound. Swamp Thing revives her the same way he restored Jude earlier, using the same life-giving energy to heal her wounds. Then after Arcane rises for one last round, Swamp Thing kills him and ends the threat for good. With Arcane dead and Alice alive, the movie closes on a quieter note. Alice asks the Swamp Thing to stay and rebuild his work, but he refuses. He tells her that Dr. Holland is dead, and with him, his work too. He then turns and disappears back into the swamp, leaving her and Jude behind as they watch him fade into the marsh that has now fully become his world. Well, the Arcane monster was short-lived, and he got exactly what he deserved. He spent the entire movie treating nature as if it was something to conquer. So the internal and external chaos that ensued after he took the formula and transformed was poetic justice. The formula didn't accentuate his intelligence, it revealed his character. He was a monster, plain and simple. I also like how the final confrontation took place in the swamp and not the lab. Arcane isn't now some external factor acting on the swamp, he's a part of it. Even though he's transformed and brings this sword into the environment, he realizes exactly how strong the forces of nature are. And for all of the intelligence between these two men, it comes down to a fight of brute strength, raw, physical, and ugly. And Alice getting stabbed raises the stakes in the movie just enough for it to get emotional. It gives Alec one last opportunity to show that he's still rooted in life and protection. And this is the contrast of the whole movie in one simple beat. Arcane is all about death and destruction, and Holland was about life and protection. And I really like this ending because it goes off into letting us know that everything isn't just fixed now. The Swamp Thing doesn't turn back into Alec Holland. He doesn't get to go home. His old life isn't just restored. He accepts what he is and where he belongs, the swamp. And the movie leaves him right there as nature's tragic protector. And that's honestly a better ending for this character. Swamp Thing is one of those movies that feels messy, weird, campy, and from an entirely different era. But that's also why it works. And if you can get your hands on the UK version, you'll thank me for it. It's got that handcrafted 80s creature feature charm with a tragic monster at the center of it and a wild villain performance from Jourdan. And it's just enough comic book madness to make it stick in your memory. And when you look at where Wes Craven was in his career, it makes this movie even more interesting because this movie was a precursor to his cinematic horror legend. That's why Swamp Thing ends up feeling like a strange little crossroads between his early work and the horror icon he was about to become. But if you like this review, be sure to check out my others. Hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell, and share this with someone you know who loves retro reviews. Again, my name is Jay, and I'll see you next time when we get back to the flicks.
We're going back to the flicks, rewind and mix 80s flicks, family ties in the Netflix fix. Reliving those days with the little ones amazed in this retro way. Old classics pave the way. Back to the flicks, rewind and mix 80s flicks, family ties in the Netflix fix. Reliving those days with the little ones amazed in this retro way.